Traveling Europe always seems to come with the idea that you need a massive budget because apparently everything and everywhere is going to be expensive. But that's just not true, and in today's video I'm going to share my tips with you guys on how you can travel Europe cheaply on a very good backpacker budget this year. What's going on everyone, my name's Aaron and I have travelled Europe for many months on a backpacker's budget, and I always get asked how. Well, firstly you need to understand when to visit and where to visit in Europe to travel on a budget this year. So let's start off with when. If possible, just avoid traveling Europe in July and August as everything is so much more expensive. I won't lie about that. Accommodation's more expensive, flights into Europe, flights around Europe are more expensive, transport's more expensive, and more often than not, attractions will be charging you probably around 5 times the amount that they should be, just because they can, because it's July and August and there's going to be a lot of travellers there then. So rather than looking at when should I not travel to Europe, let's look at when should I travel to Europe, and the answer is the shoulder months. And if you don't know what the shoulder months are, they are basically the months before and after the peak period. So my advice would be April and May, and then September and October. And the reason for that is you avoid all the negatives that I've just mentioned, because accommodation is quite reasonably well priced and you can travel around quite easily because it's not always fully booked and the prices are lower. But you also get the favourable weather. Whilst it's not scorching hot like you would find in July and August, it is still very ideal and you'll definitely catch a tan. Okay, so you know when to go, but the next question is, where do I travel in Europe to make my budget last longer? And the general rule of thumb is the further west you go, the more expensive it's going to be, and the further east you go, the cheaper it's going to be. There's a couple of exceptions to that rule, but for the most part that is correct. The only real exception is Lisbon is a lot cheaper than Berlin, because Portugal tends to be cheaper than Germany, but everywhere else I would say that rule does generally apply. If you actually want more information on all the cheap destinations in Europe to go and check out this year, then check out my blog post, which will be linked in the description, you'll see on screen right now, and it basically just looks in a bit more detail at all the best destinations that you can visit on a budget in Europe. So you've decided when to visit and where to visit in Europe, but now let's actually talk about how you can actually get to Europe. And if you're flying from outside of Europe, then I'm going to be completely honest with you, flights are going to be expensive and there's not really any way of getting around that. There's a couple of ways that you can save a bit of money, but they are going to be quite expensive. The best way to do it is fly into a region, which I'll touch upon a bit later, rather than a specific destination, and try to avoid flying on Friday to Sunday because it's just a lot more expensive due to the fact that people do tend to go for weekends. I know obviously if you're flying from very far away, you're probably not going to visit Europe for a weekend, but within Europe itself, you're probably going to have to catch a connecting flight, and then they will be the expensive ones because people do fly around Europe for weekends. Now, if you're flying from within Europe to somewhere else in Europe, then as I just mentioned, try flying into a region rather than a destination. What I mean by that is if you have a clear starting point, then try and fly as close to that starting point as possible if it works out a lot cheaper and doesn't cost too much more time. What I mean by that is when I go to Slovenia, I fly to Venice for £20 and then catch a bus from there to Ljubljana for £10, so £30 in total, which isn't bad at all. It does take a bit of time, but then when you consider the other options, which is to fly to Brussels, London or Paris and then catch a connecting flight, it actually works out probably a bit less time to do the flight and then the bus than it would be to get 2 flights, one from Liverpool to Brussels and then from Brussels to Ljubljana. And it also saves about £100 because usually flights from Liverpool to Brussels to Ljubljana would cost over £100 quite easily. Okay, so once you're in Europe, there's one huge question, and that is Interrail or buses, trains or buses. And to be honest, if you're a first-time traveller or you intend on covering a large distance, then I would say go for Interrail. So if it is your first time travelling Europe, then Interrail is great because it literally plans everything out for you. It makes everything easy. You get your train pass, you literally just jump on the train. You want to be on, you write where you've got on, you write where you've got off, and you have a certain amount of days you can use that pass on. It's very simple. And obviously if you want to cover large distances, night trains are excellent. You can literally travel from Lisbon all the way to Krakow, and in your trip there you've covered pretty much most of Europe there, so that is a great option. But if you are a bit more of an experienced traveller and having a really independent trip, then plan it all yourself and use buses like the Flixbus and public buses to get about. It will save you a lot of money. Now next up is accommodation, and as backpackers we do tend to go for one of two options, and that is hostels or Airbnb. And the best rule that I've found recently that's tried and tested is go off the amount of people in your group. So if you are a solo traveler or there is 2 of you, go for hostels. And if there's any more than 3 people, go for Airbnbs, because by the time you pay for an individual bunk bed in a dorm, if there's 3, 4, 5 of you, it will just work out a lot cheaper to get Airbnb and split the cost between you. Obviously you don't get the social side then, but you're in a large group anyway, so you'll be hanging out with your friends for the most part. So that's my general rule of thumb when it comes to accommodation. And if you really want to save some serious money, then use Couchsurfing for your accommodation. You get to meet some really cool locals, and whilst I'm still yet to couchsurf, I do know a lot of people that have done it trouble-free. Obviously, be wary of who you're actually going to go with as a host. Go for verified hosts and people with a lot of reviews. And then in terms of transport, why don't you try hitchhiking, the proper backpacking method of getting around. In Europe, it tends to be safe, but again, just use your common sense. I'm not telling you to go couchsurfing and hitchhiking. I'm saying consider it as an option if you feel comfortable doing so. Before we actually carry on with the rest of the video, I want to let you know about my Europe travel guide for budget backpackers that is now available on my website. Whether you have some unanswered questions or you want to know in more detail about budget travel around Europe, then this guide is perfect for you. The guide covers literally everything you want to know about budget traveling around Europe, from visas, vaccines, budgeting, where to visit, when to visit, and I've even included quite a few sample routes that are tried and tested that people do actually love to use, especially if you're interrailing. I've got quite a few sample routes in there that you can take some inspiration from, and there is a lot more included in the guide for just $3.99, and it is also optimized for mobile use, so you can actually have it on you whilst you're traveling. So if you do want to go and check that out, visit my website. The link will be down below in the description, or you can go to www.aaronjarvistravel.com/shop, and that will take you straight to the travel guides page. Okay, so carrying on with the tips for traveling Europe on a budget, and the next one is to book everything in advance where possible. Don't go and book your whole trip in advance and stick to it, because then that kind of kills the fun of traveling. But try and book some accommodation, maybe some transport, and certainly activities in advance if you know you're going to be in a place. And the reason for it is you get a discount. Well, either that or the price tends to go up on the day of booking. And I know you don't want to stick to a very strict schedule. I don't like that type of travel. I like to travel spontaneously. That's where options like booking.com's free cancellation comes in very handy, because you can book a room for your next destination, and then if your travel plans change, you can cancel it for free. So that is a perfect option, and just try and book slightly in advance, even 1 or 2 days before, just to get a bit of a discount. Once you're actually in your accommodation, whether it be a hostel or Airbnb, use the facilities you have. It's built into the price. Cook your own food. Say there's 3 people of you traveling in your group. I know it's very tempting just to go to a restaurant or go and get a Domino's, but let's just do a bit of math. So if you actually pay £10 per person in that 3-person group for one meal, maybe one evening meal every single day for a month, that's £900 between you for the month just on one evening meal. Whereas if you go to the supermarket, maybe you spend £10 between the group, it's just £300 between you all, so just £100 per person. So you will literally be saving £200 each over the course of a month that you can spend on other things like activities. And if you have that £200 extra on your last day, why don't you just go and do something crazy, or just save it for a future trip? So using the facilities available to you really comes in handy. Another tip is people don't utilise public transport enough. And by that, I don't mean the lovely and comfortable U-Bahn or S-Bahn in Germany or the Tube in London. I mean the proper public transport in a random town in the middle of nowhere in Eastern Europe, where you're literally the only traveller or tourist on the bus. Why would you do that? You get to mix with the locals, you get to see their way of life, you get experience and tips from them. They know the place better than anyone else. And of course you save a lot of money. It might take a bit more time to travel around that way, but it's definitely more fun, and you get a true experience of what that country is actually like. Right, this next one's a pet peeve of mine, and is actually quite a big cost-cutting technique. Avoid tours at all costs. And what I mean by that is, I don't mean avoid tours like a tour guide at an actual attraction. If you've got to pay for a tour guide or it will provide you with a better experience, go for that. That's not the type of the tours I'm on about. I mean the tours where you pay for someone to arrange you from getting from A to B and giving you maybe a free bottle of water along the way. It's money making at its absolute best. So people will literally pay £50 to get on a bus from A to B because they can't be bothered doing the research themselves, and they'll give you a free bottle of water and a map. and people will be like, oh, that's great. If you spend literally just a tiny bit of time preparing before your trip, doing a bit of research, you will realize that you can do pretty much every single trip on your own, in your group, however you want to do it, on your own time, and then you will not be rushed. You will not feel like you have to stick to a schedule. And now I've actually got 3 very, very easy cost-cutting techniques that I personally swear by, that you can literally do in an instant. The first one is pick up a travel card that has no ATM fees. I personally use the post office one here in the UK. Now it does actually have ATM fees, but they're a lot less than my actual bank card that I usually use. But the key feature with the post office travel money card is you can use it in the chip and pin machine and contactless anywhere in Europe or anywhere that offers the currency for free. So you can literally just load your money onto that and then use the card. Maybe carry a small amount of cash with you before you go, and then just use your card everywhere else, and you'll save a lot of money rather than having to withdraw money every time you want to get something. Student IDs are great in Europe. Even if you're not a student like me, I still carry my student ID, and you'll get discounts of up to 75% on attractions, accommodation and transport. And strangely, in Europe, if you carry an EU passport, some places will give you heavily discounted rates. But the main thing I want you to take away from this video is flexibility is key. If you are flexible and open-minded about your travels in Europe, then you will save the most money. Why? Because if you stick to a very, very strict schedule on someone else's time that's already been pre-planned, you'll end up having to spend a lot more money because you have to go to certain places on certain days and take certain transport. Whereas if you just remain flexible, you can always find a cheaper option, and that is the way to travel Europe on a budget. So that is all for my travel tips on how you can travel Europe on a budget this year. If you want some more inspiration on a trip to Europe, then head over to my blog. As I said, it will be linked down below in the description. If you did find any of this video useful, be sure to let me know by leaving a like. Put any of your cost-cutting tips down below in the comment section. Share this video with your friends, and if you are new around here, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Thank you all for watching. Till next time, goodbye.